Now I'm going to have my second conversation with Jim Sosnin, and we're going to be talking about some of the later developments that happened at the Trobe University Music Department once computers became more common. So tell me, what did we have at La Trobe in terms of computer music in, say, 1980, 1981, that time frame?
There are a few different directions that we went in. Graham Hare was instrumental in getting the PDP-11 system for the department, and the idea was that it would be used for computer music synthesis and also for the digital to analog conversion, so that the digital representations of the sounds that people invented could be heard through an analog system.
So what I remember is we were running Music 4BF on a VAX mainframe, which was on the other side of the campus, and we would do all our punch cards in Fortran 77, I suspect, and we would put it in at 5 o'clock at night. It would run overnight. We'd collect it the next morning. This is a big magnetic tape, and then we'd walk across the campus to where the music department was. We'd go up to the PDP-11, put it on, and it would play it back, assuming we didn't have any errors.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like we expected it to be, but then it wasn't, because we got it wrong.
That's right, yes. So it turned out that, well, maybe it was planned that way from the start. The PDP-11 wasn't really powerful enough to do computer music synthesis in any sort of reasonable time. You might have to wait days just for a couple of seconds or a few minutes of sound. So yes, the big university computer system, which was I think a DEC 10 in the early days, before the VAX systems came along. So it was a DEC 10 system running Fortran, for our purposes anyway. Oh, and just as an aside, the reason it was done in Fortran was because the music for software that Graham Hare brought back from the States was a Fortran port of it. It was originally not written in Fortran, but by the time it became Fortran it was called Music 4BF, F for the Fortran, and that was thought to be accessible to a larger number of programmers as an easy to learn language. People who wanted to write any modifications of some of the digital instruments that were part of Music 4B could do it in Fortran. But most people who used it didn't need to learn Fortran, they just needed to learn how to use the particular instruments that represented things like oscillators and filters and whatever else to generate notes or sounds, whether you wanted to call them notes or not. And yes, they were done on the big central university system, which was a time-shared system. Our uses had a low priority, so they were overnight runs, and they needed to be overnight runs also because the programs ran for so long just to generate a little bit of sound. So the tapes that people brought back after a synthesis run would then be put on the PDP-11, which had a tape drive attached, and I wrote the software that would extract the sounds from the tape and play them through the PDP-11, and the actual digital to analog conversion was done not on any sort of digital music system, but on a modified science data acquisition system for all sorts of scientific instrumentation purposes. It had a 12-bit ADC, 12-bit DAC system in it. I can't remember if it was a stereo DAC, I think it might have been.
I can't remember either.
I think we made it into a stereo DAC by making, taking sample and hold into two channels out of it. So we had either mono or stereo in and then stereo out of this 12-bit system. Not a very high sampling rate. By today's standards, you'd think it was extremely low, but back then we were able to get reasonable fidelity out of something that we ran either at, what was it, 16 kilohertz, I think.
Oh, really?
Sampling rate. It was pretty low, and that meant that to avoid very audible aliasing, we had to have pretty steep filters in it that were, I think, designed and built by Julian Driscoll at the time. So he built some nice filters for us. So anyway, this system that was put together, hacked together you could say, from science and industrial type equipment, we put it to musical use, and people could put their tapes on, play them back, and then if they wanted to keep a copy they could re-record it onto an analogue reel tape or cassette tape or whatever, and then come back the next day and make some changes, because you had to have an overnight run to hear the results of the previous change, so any changes took a long time to implement. It wasn't really a real-time hands-on experience at all. You had to plan a lot in advance and then hope that the results would be okay.
Working with that system is what made me get interested in doing a hybrid approach where we could get a microprocessor system controlling an analog synthesizer. So that's what led into whatever we were using, the Pia 8700, which is the 6502 microprocessor, and then we got the 6800, and we put in 8K of RAM, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly.
I think it's something like that, yeah. So, and then we started doing the hybrid things. And I remember one year we went to your other house and you'd got them out and the code was still running. I don't know if it still is.
Well, it's very unlikely, but you never know.
Yeah.
Just like the old DOS box. It's over 40 years old and that still runs.
Yeah.
There was the PIA system, and then there was the 6800 system, and there were quite a few. In fact, the very, very first one that I ever worked on, this is even before I came to La Trobe, was a microprocessor system from National Semiconductor. You don't hear much about National Semiconductor in relation to early microprocessor systems, but they did have one, and it was called the SCMP, or SC/MP, and I think people just used to call it the SCAMP. And Electronics Australia, a well-known Australian journal at the time, published an article which allowed people to build their own mini SCAMP system from a kit. And I remember building one and programming it to run a little music tune. It was very, very difficult to program, even more difficult than writing assembler, where you could use a keyboard to type stuff into a later microprocessor system. This one had individual switches for the bits. There was one set of 8 switches for the address bus and another set of 8 switches for the data that you put into a particular address. You had to toggle the 8 bits of address to a particular address, then toggle the 8 switches for the bits for the code that you wanted to put in that address, and then press the enter button, and that's the way you'd program.
So it's literally programming in binary?
In binary, yes. So it took me about half an hour, I think, to program in something like a 20-second sequence of little music notes.
That sounds pretty quick.
And it was, the worst part of it was that it had no permanent memory, so if you switch the power off, the next day you'd have to program it all in again. I did build a battery backup for it, and that made it sort of last a couple of days before it would lose its memory, but this was a very, very early microprocessor system that certainly wasn't used in any university or any sort of teaching environment that I can remember.
Yes, because actually I remember when we did our Physics 2M class, which was the physics class for musicians, we actually spent a lot of time learning how to program an 8080 or something or other like that, which was then controlling something very simple, which is why when I later on came over to you and we started doing those other things, I kind of knew how to do it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, those courses that the physics department ran for us were very useful for giving people a useful start in all sorts of things, like understanding the physics of sound was one very important area, and psychoacoustics as well. But the programming part of it was a good thing as well. So anyway, I've digressed a bit, but there were quite a few different systems in the early days, starting with the PDP-11. And in fact, we retained that even when we got our own larger computer for the music department that could do the overnight synthesis runs, or even daytime ones if we wanted, because we weren't time sharing it with the rest of the university. We were time sharing it between a few music staff and students, including, well, I think the students were mainly postgrads then rather than undergrads that had access to that. But during a synthesis run, it would just be doing that alone, and so it was better than waiting overnight from the central university system. That was an unusual system, a Charles River
yes.
data systems, Universe 68 I think it was called, because it had a couple of 68,000 chips running it, named after the Charles River in Boston, where the company is, I believe, Charles River Data Systems. So anyway, we got this system and did our own synthesis runs on that, but as well, at the same time, we were getting smaller systems that undergrads could use. So we had the BBC computers,
that's right,
which were very good for learning in assembler, because you could mix higher level parts of the program, which was in BASIC, horrible language, but it was very useful at the time. And BBC BASIC was a lot better than some of the others.
Yes, it was a structured BASIC.
It was a structured BASIC, and you could mix BASIC commands and assembler commands in a single file, and write your program so that any of the fast bits that were related to getting stuff in and out of the analog world via ADC or DAC, they'd be written in assembler, and then higher level parts of the program where you might need to interact with a user with keyboard keystrokes or feedback through the monitor, they could be written in BASIC. So they worked very well to enable undergraduates to learn more about real-time programming for music synthesis work. I continued using them for a number of years, even when we stopped using them at La Trobe, because I did other projects with other people that were sort of outside the uni, and the BBC Micro was just such a useful computer because it was so versatile. But yeah, I think in the department we did various tests with a larger number of systems, because by then the personal computer idea was starting to take shape, and the IBM PC, as the early ones were known, like that. Yeah,
it's an NEC, but you know what I mean.
Yes, that was one contender, and the physics department had one of those, and we wrote some audio software on those to see how it'd go, and it was okay, but a bit cumbersome. And there were also Amiga systems that came in around that time, and there's one there. One of the original Amigas, not for the department, but that's one that I bought to keep trying the ideas. Another one that still works.
Yeah.
And then there was Macintosh, and the early Macintoshes proved to be either easiest to use or more versatile. There was some reason why we adopted them. So fairly early on in the piece, when the early Mac, which was the little box-shaped all-in-one screen and whole works in the one little box, the Mac Plus, I think it was called. Then there was the Mac SE. We had quite a few of those, and staff members were using them also for their own sort of office needs, for writing notes and keeping records and doing all that sort of stuff. And the Mac computers, I think, were popular because they were easy to learn to use, and they had a mouse that you could control things on the screen with. They were a bit ahead of the IBM or Microsoft crowd with getting the mouse idea going.
So along this time, we were basically using MIDI to control various MIDI synthesizers once we got into Macintosh.
That's right, yes, we built MIDI interfaces for the Macs, and it didn't take long before commercial MIDI interfaces became available for these computers, because they became quite popular with musicians all around the world. So there was computers controlling synthesizers via MIDI, and then as the computers became more powerful, you could do software synthesis and also other real-time processing on your own little personal computer. So we had some larger Mac systems where we had higher quality ADC and DAC systems attached to them. And I think these were part of the either the composition lab or another little room that was dedicated to this sort of work, which we might have called the computer lab. I can't remember now.
I don't remember, but I thought in Sound Lab 1, which is the composition room, I'm pretty sure it had a 2FX or something like that. And in that room they had the TX-81Z, no, TX-816 Yamaha FM synthesizer, DX7s, eventually had Kurzweils and things. This is going into the 90s then. So yeah, at that point all of the commercial MIDI things were coming in parallel with whatever else people were home brewing at the university.
Yeah. And even going a bit beyond that, I think we ended up getting a couple of Next machines.
That's right.
That's the company that Steve Jobs started after he either left or was kicked out of Apple. And the Next was meant to be another sort of leap beyond the ideas that were behind the Mac, and they had much more powerful processors in them. And we had two machines, one that was sort of named after its graphics capabilities, so what did we call that? Farben. And the one that in fact they could both do both graphics and music, but we call them Klang and Farben. So of course Klang Farben
melody.
So they were the two Next machines, and I think a lot of postgrads did some very interesting work with those. I didn't have much to do with them myself, so I can't really say much more about them, but I remember them always lurking in those labs. They were black rather than the paler cream or white colour that most of our other computers were, so they really stood out.
But you were involved doing a lot of MIDI stuff because you built various MIDI controllers and things like that.
Yeah, some of that was work that I'd started privately at home, just out of interest. And a lot of the work I did was with the PIC microprocessor. This is a little chip that was very, very cheap, made by the Micro Circuits, I think, Micro something company. And it was only an 8-bit system, but it had all sorts of high-speed capabilities on it. And they started out with a chip that would only run out at, I think, run at a 4 megahertz clock rate, but after a couple of years that extended that to 10 megahertz and then 20 megahertz. And with a 20 megahertz chip you could do some serious work beyond just doing MIDI commands for a computer. But certainly originally, even the 4 megahertz chip was good for MIDI work. I designed quite a few little circuits that work between the analog world and the MIDI world. So controllers that would either use switches and knobs to interface that to MIDI and control synthesizers that way, or a MIDI wand, which was...
which is here.
Yeah, there's one of the...
I have one in Singapore, it still works, and I use that in Sonic Escapade when we get the audience participation. They'll come up and they will wave their wand around and it will play the drums.
So anyway, the MIDI wand was a very satisfying project because it allowed sonar, sort of a sonic equivalent of radar, to be used for position tracking. So the little microphone in the tip of this would pick up ultrasonic waves being emitted by the two ultrasonic speakers, and through trigonometry it would know where this thing was in a sort of roughly a square space over the top of the device itself. It was interesting because part of the geometry needed a square root calculation, so I had all sorts of fun designing a square root program that would work in 8-bit assembler.
In real time? In
real time, yes. Of course it's not real time in the same sense as
the synthesis.
You need audio sample rates. The sampling rate here was more like 100 hertz. In fact, you can vary it with a little
Control
at the side of the unit here, depending upon how fast or slow you wanted note events to come out. I call them note events because that's the way that MIDI was organised, but people didn't necessarily use it for playing notes. They could be used for controlling all sorts of things.
Yeah, so, very useful. You know, we've got 2 of these in Singapore, and they both still work as far. Well, mine definitely works.
Oh, that's good. Good to know. Yeah. So there were all sorts of little projects like that, and I was forever tinkering and sometimes designing stuff at home and bringing it in. In some cases it would be of general use, and in other cases it wouldn't. But it was a good few years of being able to work with a variety of technologies to make it all come together. So there's the larger computers, the microprocessors like the PIC chip. That's part of this. That little black module there that you probably can't see from there is the PIC chip. And then of course going on to larger systems as well. We covered all those areas over many years at La Trobe.
So it covered virtually everything until it was closed down.
Yeah, that was a sad time. Towards the late 1990s, I think 1997 was when the word finally was issued that the department was to close. We were given 2 years to close down so that we could teach out the current lot of undergraduates. But even though that was a sad time, we did have a large number of graduates over the 20 plus years that the department existed who went on to bigger and better things.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
I go to computer music conferences and I run into people from La Trobe.
Yeah, well, many of the La Trobe graduates worked in similar fields in their own universities and schools all over the place. And
which is what I did.
Yeah, there's people in recording studios, there's people in broadcast stations like the ABC, all over the place. So it was successful from that point of view.
Made a big impact. Okay, well, thank you very much for telling me all of this stuff and giving me more insight into the things where I was there but I didn't necessarily know.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.
Before I lose too much more of my memory.
Well, you'll be able to look at the video and remember.
Good point. Okay. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Right.